Hello everyone, so in this video we'll be talking about JWT, that is JSON Web Tokens, and how it is different from JWS and JWE. What will be the structure of these formats? We'll be touching on all these topics in next 10 minutes. So without wasting any further time, let's start the video. So let's start with the purpose. So we are using JWT in most of the cases where we have to secure our communication between the two parties. For an example, in daily life you can see that whenever you go to a bank to transfer some money to any other account or some other party, then you usually give a check, right? And in that case you fill some amount, the party name as well as your sign underline. So in that case, you're ensuring that the communication is secure via secure channel, right? In that case, it's a bank, but you are giving a certain payload to the bank. The payload here is the amount and the party to which you are transferring the money, and you are signing that payload with your personal signature, obviously. So in this way, you are giving a kind of payload which is signed by you via secure channel to the third party. You can replace that kind of same thing in JWT as well. So JWT is used for transferring a payload between two parties with some kind of encryption or some kind of signature as well, so that in between the communication there is no way to change that, no way to alter that, and there is another provision that nobody can see as well. Okay, so let's first understand what is JWT and how it is related to JWS and JWE. So as you can see here, JWT is nothing but the specification which gives you the standard by which you can structure your communication payload between the two parties. But actual implementation is done by JWS and JWE. When you talk about the JWS, you are actually referring to a content which provides you the facility of integrity. That means when you transfer the payload using JWS implementation, your content cannot be tampered in between. The integrity of the payload will remain the same, and you can ensure that while you are communicating your payload, right? But in case of JWE, they provide edit functionality, edit feature, I would say, that in that case you can encrypt your payload as well. Nobody on the communication channel can see the payload that you are transferring via this JWT method, right? So this is the main difference between JWS and JWE. Both are actually the implementation of JWT itself. That's why we commonly say that we are using JWT tokens or JWT for authorization or JWT for other things, right? But in actual term, it is either of these implementation. You must be using either JWS or JWE. Okay. So now let's start with JWS first. JWS is basically known as JSON Web Signature. It comprises of three main components: header and your payload and the signature. Header basically contains the metadata about your the whole payload and signature. If there is anything that you want to specify here, you can easily specify the data about that thing here. So one of the example is the algorithm. If you are using any algorithm that you in the signature, you can specify the algorithm name here. Also the key ID you can specify here as well, right? And the next thing is the payload. This is the main thing which you are actually transferring from one party to another party using JWT, right? So this is the main data, and it can contain number of attributes, some common attributes. Let's say when this particular, these are basically the very generic attributes which you use when you are using JWT. So ISS is basically the issuer time. So when this particular JWT has been issued. Similarly, there is another one, the expiry time, when this particular JWT can expire. Apart from that, you can also specify some custom attributes that you are transferring via this JWS. So let's say you are saying the customer name that you want to transfer as part of payload, then you can specify here as well. So these are some kind of payload attributes, but it's not restricted to these only. You can specify any other attribute as well. Now coming to the signature, which is the most important thing here, which ensures the integrity of your whole JWS. To ensure the integrity, it's basically calculate the hash of your data. So data here, I mean the header and the payload. So when you consider the data as this, after that you have to hash this data. So for hashing this data, you have an algorithm. So you can choose from many of the algorithms that are specified as part of JWT specification. For our example purpose, let's say we are using HMAC algorithm, right? In that case, we can pass that data into this HMAC algorithm and we can provide some secret salt as well, which combinedly create a data which will be hashed out and will be added into the signature part. So now if there will be any change in this header or in payload, that signature will not match with that. Ensures the integrity of your whole payload. Okay, now let's start what is JWE. JWE is basically JSON Web Encryption. It is used to encrypt your payload, and it will obviously ensure the privacy of your payload as well. Okay, so this JWE contains 5 components, and the main component in this is this ciphertext, which is basically your this ciphertext, which basically is your payload which has been encrypted here. But how? So let's create this structure one by one. You have a text which you want to transfer, right? So before transferring that text, you have to first encrypt it. So for that you need an algorithm. So let's say we have an algorithm, encryption algorithm, which we say as encryption algorithm as X, right? Now this particular algorithm requires some kind of salt or the nonce as well, the random key, right? So that random key or nonce you can say as the initialization vector, okay, which is this component. When you combine these 2 components and pass it via the algorithm, encryption algorithm, it will generate you a ciphertext, which is the encrypted payload plus certain tag as well. Now for this encryption algorithm, you need 2 things. One is obviously the algorithm, right? The encryption algorithm plus a encryption key, which is known as the content encryption key. Now we have utilized these 2 things, the 3 things rather, right? And this content encryption key is this one, and the header, as we know, it contains the metadata about your whole payload that we are sending here, right? Now we know what all these are, but we are not going to send in this manner only, right? So as we find out, the ciphertext is the encrypted text that we have just created here. The tag is the output of that encryption. This initialization vector is again this one, and the encrypted key. So if we have uses this content encryption key to encrypt this payload, then we cannot send it in a plain format here, right? We have to send this encryption key after encryption. Okay, so for that encryption, let's say we will be using RSA algorithm, and for RSA algorithm we know we have 2 kind of keys, private and public, right? So as a recipient, we will be transferring our content encryption key after encrypting it using public key. So now this content encryption key is encrypted using the public key of the recipient, and whatever is the output, we will be putting it here. So that's why we are calling it as an encrypted key, right? We cannot send it in a simple manner to the third party, because if somebody got the key, then he or she can obviously identify what is the text here, because they can decrypt it. So that's why we have encrypted the key as well. So now we have created header, we have created the encrypted key, we have this initialization vector or nonce, we have the ciphertext which is the output of encryption, and this tag as well. Right now, base64 encode each component again as we did last time. So do the base64 encoding of each component individually and place this in this format, and the output is JWE. Easy, right? And yeah, one more thing to note here is whatever algorithm that we have used as part of JWE, right? We have used two algorithms. One is for encrypting this the plain text to ciphertext, and one algorithm we use to encrypt this encryption key. We have to mention both the algorithms here in the header. As I mentioned earlier, that this header contains the metadata about your the whole payload, right? So there are two attributes to inform about these things. One is algorithm, ALG, and one is encryption algorithm, and the content encryption key encryption algorithm. Okay, so this will contain the algorithm that you use to encrypt the text to ciphertext. This particular ENC will contain that algorithm name. Let's say we are using AES, then we can specify this information here. And the algorithm that we will be using to encrypt the content encryption key itself will be specified here. Let's say in our case we are using RSA. So this particular information will reside into the header. So now this whole thing completes the JWE information. Now let's come into the last part. As I mentioned earlier, that we will be touching JWA and JWK as well. So JWA, as I specified earlier, that we are using algorithms to encrypt our content. We are using algorithm to create the signature in JWS as well. So RFC standard specifies some algorithms that we can use in our JWT tokens. So these all algorithm that you can see here are basically the algorithm that we can use to create JWS and JWE, and combinedly these are known as the JWA. That means it's just JSON Web algorithms. Similarly, we used content encryption key, right, in JWE to encrypt our content. So that content encryption key, when you represent in this format, then that will be known as JWK. So content encryption key is obviously a key, but when you are representing it in this format, there are other formats as well, but when you represent in this particular format, then it will be known as JWK. So here you can see the key type, the algorithm type, and the key ID, all the information about that JWK. So I hope we are now clear about all these different JWT format and different JW terms. JWT, JWS, JWE are basically commonly known as JWT, and these are basically used for maintaining the integrity of your payload and for encrypting a payload. And JWA and JWK are basically a kind of helping hand which help you to create JWT. I hope all this is clear to you. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.